The day the white Rolls-Royce died in front of my garage, I was already arguing with a ghost. It was late afternoon, that tired hour when the sun slants low and everything feels heavier than it should. I had grease under my nails and Marcus on my mind, the way I often did when the shop went quiet. I was standing there with a wrench in my hand, staring at an engine that wouldn't start, muttering under my breath like he could still hear me. "See," I said to the empty bay, "they build things fancy now, but they don't build them right." That's when the Rolls-Royce rolled to a stop outside Holt's Auto, coughing once before going silent, like a proud animal that didn't want to admit it was hurt. The garage door was half open. Dust hum in the air, catching the light. The old radio on my shelf was playing something soft and sad, one of those songs that knows when not to hurry. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped forward, already annoyed. Folks in cars like that didn't come to places like mine unless they had no other choice. The driver's door opened first. A woman stepped out, tall, composed, dressed like she belonged on magazine covers and charity boards. Claudia Rhodes, though I didn't know her name yet. She looked around my garage with careful eyes, taking in the cracked concrete, the crooked sign, the smell of oil and rust. Her mouth tightened, not in disgust exactly, but concern, like someone realizing the situation was worse than they'd hoped. Then the passenger door opened. The girl took longer. She moved slowly, deliberately, one hand gripping the door frame. When she finally stood, I saw the metal before I saw her face. Sleek, carbon fiber braces wrapped around both legs, intricate and expensive, humming faintly as tiny motors compensated for each careful step. Her jaw was clenched, her eyes were fixed on the ground. Pain has a posture, and she wore it like a second skin. Something inside my chest went tight and sharp. For a moment, I wasn't in my garage anymore. I was 20 years younger, watching my little brother Marcus struggle to stand up from the couch, pretending it didn't hurt because he didn't want to scare me. I could almost hear him say, "I'm fine, Ellie. Just give me a second." The girl took 2 steps toward me, and I heard it. The faint click of misaligned joints, the way the braces compensated instead of supporting. It was wrong. I didn't know how I knew. I just did. "My name's Elias," I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. "Looks like you broke down," the woman nodded. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. "We were told to pull over immediately." Her accent was polished, educated. Money lived in her voice. I glanced back at the car, then at the girl again. "You okay?" The girl lifted her eyes then. They were dark and tired, too old for 19. "I'll survive," she said quietly. Marcus used to say that too. Before that day, my life was small and predictable. That's not a complaint. Predictable is safe when you've lost someone. Holt's Auto had been in my family for 42 years. My father built it with his hands, and a stubborn belief that people deserved honest work. Marcus and I grew up in this garage, handing him tools, sweeping floors, listening to stories about engines like they were living things. When Dad died, Marcus was supposed to take over. He was smarter than me, always reading manuals, always asking why something worked the way it did. Then his legs started failing. A genetic condition, the doctors explained with diagrams and soft voices. They gave him braces, then better braces, then surgeries that promised improvement but delivered pain. By the end, he moved like every step was a negotiation with his own body. I took over the shop because someone had to. Marcus used to sit on a stool in the corner, offering advice, sketching ideas on scrap paper. He'd tap the metal braces on his legs and say, "These things aren't built for people. They're built for patents." He died 5 years ago. Complications, infection, a system that worked exactly as designed, just not for him. Since then, it's just been me and the garage. I open at 7. I close when the light fades. I fix what I can and tell people the truth when I can't. I eat my lunch standing up. I talk to Marcus when I'm tired. That's my life. So when Claudia Rhodes asked, "Do you think you can fix it?" she meant the car. I looked at the Rolls-Royce, then back at her daughter. "Simone." She introduced her as. Simone leaned against the car, careful not to lock her knees. Sweat dotted her hairline even though it wasn't hot. I can take a look, I said. But parts for this thing aren't cheap. That's not the concern, Claudia replied quickly. Time is. I nodded and rolled my toolbox over. The car problem was simple enough. Sensor failure, bad wiring, over-engineered nonsense. As I worked, my eyes kept drifting back to Simone. The braces whirred softly every time she shifted her weight, compensating for an alignment that fought her body instead of moving with it. Finally, I couldn't keep quiet. Those braces, I said, casual like I wasn't stepping onto sacred ground. They hurting you? Simone hesitated. Claudia answered. They're the most advanced mobility system on the market. $800,000. Designed by Stratham Medical Systems. I straightened slowly. Doesn't mean they're right. Claudia's eyes sharpened. Excuse me. I swallowed. My heart was beating too fast. I'm not a doctor. But I've seen bad design. And I've seen people pay for it with their bodies. Simone looked at me then, really looked. There was hope there, fragile and dangerous. You're saying something's wrong, she said. I nodded. I'm saying they're fighting you, not helping you. The garage went quiet except for the ticking of hot metal cooling. Claudia crossed her arms. And what exactly are you proposing? I thought of Marcus. Of all the nights I'd wished I'd done more than listen. I think, I said slowly, I can make them better. That was the moment everything started to break open. I didn't know it yet. I just knew my hands were shaking. And for the first time in 5 years, the ghost I'd been arguing with felt like it was standing right beside me, listening. I finished fixing the car, handed Claudia the keys. She didn't leave right away. She watched Simone try to walk again, wince flickering across her face. Mom, Simone said quietly, I want to hear what he has to say. Claudia looked torn, protective, desperate. Finally, she met my eyes. If you're wrong, she said, you could seriously hurt her. I nodded. I know. The weight of that truth settled between us, heavy and real. And somewhere deep inside, a promise I'd made to my brother started to stir. Claudia didn't say yes right away. She studied me the way people with power study risk, measuring, calculating, deciding how much control they were willing to give up. Simone stood quietly beside her, one hand gripping the metal frame of her brace, knuckles pale. I need to understand something, Claudia said at last. What exactly are you qualified to do? I didn't flinch. I'm qualified to see when something's wrong. I'm qualified to take things apart and put them back together so they work the way they're supposed to. And I'm qualified to stop if I'm about to make things worse. That earned me a small, surprised breath from Simone. It wasn't confidence she was responding to. It was honesty. We moved into the garage office, a cramped room with an old desk, a coffee maker that never tasted quite right, and a framed photo of Marcus and me as teenagers, arms slung around each other, grease on our faces. Simone's gaze lingered on the picture. Your brother, she asked. I nodded. He should be standing where I am. She didn't ask what happened. People who live with pain recognize it in others and don't always need the details. Claudia perched on the edge of the chair, posture straight, hands folded. If we do this, she said, I need assurances, medical oversight. Liability coverage. I almost laughed. Ma'am, the only coverage I have is a leaky roof and a fire extinguisher from 1998. Silence followed. Then Simone spoke again, her voice steadier now. Mom, please. Just let him look. Claudia closed her eyes. Just for a second. When she opened them, something had shifted. Fear. Maybe, or faith. Sometimes they look the same. All right, she said. You can examine the braces. Nothing more. No alterations. Yet. Simone smiled, small and careful, like she was afraid Joy might hurt too. The braces were engineering marvels on paper. Carbon fiber, titanium joints, microprocessors adjusting in real time. They were also rigid where the human body needed forgiveness. I ran my fingers along the inner supports, feeling the pressure points, watching Simone's face as she stood. That's where it pinches, she said softly, pointing to her calf. And here, she tapped near her knee. It feels like it's pulling me apart. I crouched, eye level with the joints. Because it is, I murmured. They built it to correct, not to cooperate. Claudia leaned forward. What does that mean? It means they forced an ideal alignment instead of listening to her body's natural movement. Every step, the brace wins, she loses. Simone swallowed. Can you change that? I hesitated. The right answer was no. The safe answer. But Marcus's voice echoed in my head. Safe isn't always right, Ellie. I can try, I said, but not here. I'd need time and permission. Claudia stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the fading light. I could see her reflection in the glass. Strong, controlled, terrified. You're asking me, she said without turning, to trust my daughter's legs to a man with a wrench. I thought of all the men in white coats who'd asked Marcus to trust his life to promises and paperwork. I'm asking you to trust someone who will stop the moment she says it hurts, I replied. Claudia turned then. Her eyes were wet. She wiped them away like they'd betrayed her. How long? She asked. 2 days, I said. Maybe 3. And if it fails, I met Simone's eyes. Then we put them back exactly how they were. No harm done. Simone nodded, resolve settling into her bones. Let him. Claudia exhaled slowly. All right, she said. 2 days. They brought the braces back the next morning. I cleared my workbench, laid out my tools like I was preparing for surgery. The garage smelled of oil and coffee and something electric. Anticipation, maybe. As I worked, I talked. To Simone, to myself, to Marcus. I sketched adjustments on cardboard, measured angles twice, sometimes 3. I realigned joints, softened pressure points, allowed for micro movements the original design had locked away. Simone sat nearby, watching, asking questions. She was sharp, curious, her mind as agile as her body wanted to be. Why didn't they do this? She asked at one point. Because it's slow, and it can't be patented. Claudia visited once, hovering like a shadow, then left again, trusting me more than she was comfortable admitting. On the 3rd day, it was time. Simone stood in the center of the garage. The light was bright now, midday sun pouring in. And I tightened the last strap, my hand steady despite the weight of the moment. Tell me everything you feel, I said. She took a step, then another, her brow furrowed, not in pain but confusion. It's quiet, she said. Inside my legs, it's quiet. She took a 3rd step, then a 4th. Her breathing quickened. Elias, she whispered. It doesn't hurt. Claudia covered her mouth, a sound escaping her that was half sob, half prayer. Simone walked the length of the garage. Then she turned and ran. Just a few steps, just enough. She stopped, laughing, crying, hands shaking as she reached for the wall to steady herself. I can feel the ground, she said. I can feel me. I sank onto a stool, my knees giving out. Tears blurred my vision. Marcus's face swam in my mind, smiling that crooked smile of his. You did it, Claudia said, her voice breaking. You did it. I shook my head. She did. The joy lasted exactly 48 hours. On the 3rd day, a letter arrived. Thick paper, legal language, Stratham Medical Systems, cease and desist, unauthorized modification. Intellectual property infringement. Threats of lawsuits so large they felt theoretical, like numbers you couldn't picture. Claudia read it in my office, jaw set. Simone sat silently, her braces humming softly, perfectly. They're afraid, Simone said finally. Claudia nodded. And powerful. I folded the letter carefully. So am I said quietly. In my own way. Outside, the garage door rattled in the breeze. The world hadn't changed yet, but it was about to notice. That night after they left, I stayed in the garage long after the sun went down. The letter from Stratham Medical Systems lay open on my desk, its words sharp and precise, like a scalpel meant to scare more than cut. Immediate cessation, irreparable harm, aggressive legal remedies. They wrote the way people do when they're used to being obeyed. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and slid it into Marcus's old toolbox. The garage was quiet except for the ticking of cooling metal and the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. I sat on the stool where Marcus used to perch, my elbows on my knees, staring at the concrete floor. I could still picture him there, tapping his brace with a knuckle, asking questions no one wanted to answer. What happens if we're wrong? What happens if they're wrong? I didn't sleep much that night. When I did, I dreamed of Marcus running, not fast, not far, just enough to feel free. I woke up with my heart pounding and the taste of rust in my mouth. By morning, the fear had settled into something steadier. Resolve, maybe, or stubbornness. They're cousins. They're cousins. Claudia called before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. They've contacted my attorneys, she said. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension underneath, like a wire pulled too tight. They're furious. I figured they would be. They're claiming you endangered Simone. Taken ex Simone. That the changes you made are untested, reckless. I thought of Simone's face when she ran. She's never been safer. I know, Claudia said, but truth and leverage are different things. There was a pause. Then she said, I can protect you. Legally. Financially. I closed my eyes. That's not what this is about. I know, she replied softly. But it might become that. After we hung up, I unlocked the garage and went back to work. Cars don't care about lawsuits. Engines don't threaten you with injunctions. There was comfort in that. Around noon, a woman walked in I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, gray hair pulled back, eyes sharp behind thin framed glasses. She wore a blazer that had seen better days and carried herself like someone who'd learned to take up less space than she deserved. Elias Holt, she asked. That's me. My name is Eleanor Vance, she said. I'm a biomedical engineer, or I was, before I started asking the wrong questions. Something in her tone made me straighten. What brings you here? She smiled faintly. Stratham Medical Systems. That got my full attention. She explained it slowly, carefully. How she'd worked on early iterations of adaptive mobility devices. How she'd raised concerns about rigid alignment models, about patient pain being dismissed as adjustment periods. How her research had been shelved, then repurposed without her name attached. They build for averages, she said, her fingers tracing the edge of my workbench. But bodies aren't averages, they're stories. I nodded. Marcus used to say something like that. Eleanor looked up. Your brother, I told her. Not everything, just enough. When I finished, she exhaled. When Simone walked without pain, you didn't break their design, she said. You exposed it. What do we do? I asked. Her eyes met mine, steady and unafraid. We make it public. Carefully. Truthfully. And with evidence they can't bury. The first time Simone spoke on camera, her hands were shaking. We stood in the garage, lights set up between oil stains and tool racks. It wasn't polished. It was honest. Eleanor stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching like a guardian. Simone took a breath. My name is Simone Rhodes, she said, and for most of my life walking hurt. Tense that. She talked about the braces, the promises, the pain she thought was normal because everyone told her it was. She talked about stepping into my garage and being seen, not as a liability, not as a diagnosis, but as a person. And this isn't a miracle, she said, her voice firming. It's listening. When the video went live, the response was slow at first. A few comments, a few shares, then it spread like something that had been waiting to be named. Emails poured in, messages from parents, veterans, athletes, children, stories that sounded too familiar, pain dismissed, concerns minimized, lives adjusted downward to fit devices that wouldn't bend. Stratham responded the way corporations do when cornered. Press releases, carefully worded denials, subtle attacks on my credibility. Unlicensed mechanic. Well-meaning but dangerous. I read every word. Let them underestimate. The hearing was held in a windowless room that smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. I wore my best shirt, the one Marcus used to tease me about. Claudia sat beside Simone, her hand resting lightly on her daughter's knee. Eleanor sat on my other side, a stack of documents in front of her. Stratham's lawyers spoke first. Smooth, confident. They talked about regulations, about safety, about how innovation required discipline. Then Eleanor stood. She spoke quietly, methodically, laying out data, studies, internal memos. She showed how concerns had been flagged and ignored. Finally, Simone stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just walked. Across the room. Back again. Smooth. Pain-free. "This is what happens," she said, "when you design with empathy instead of ego." The room was silent. The decision wasn't final that day. But it was enough. A provisional license. Oversight. Permission to continue under guidance. I stepped outside afterward, the air cold and sharp. Claudia hugged me without asking. Simone smiled like the world had finally made room for her. Marcus's toolbox felt lighter when I carried it back into the garage. That night, alone again, I sat at my bench and wrote a name on a piece of paper. Halt Adaptive Design Lab. It wasn't much, just words. But words have a way of becoming doors. I taped it to the wall above my tools. Marcus, I thought. Wherever you are, I kept my promise. The first person to come to the lab wasn't a headline. It was a boy named Aaron with scuffed sneakers and a mother who apologized too much. They stood just inside the garage doorway, uncertain, like they might be in the wrong place. The sign still said Holtz Auto, though beneath it, Idid, Tay. Taped a piece of cardboard with the new name written in thick black marker. It curled at the edges from humidity and hope. "I heard about you online," the mother said. "My sister sent me the video." Aaron shifted from foot to foot. His braces were bulky, plastic and metal, rubbing his skin raw. He tried to smile, but it didn't quite land. "You came to the right place," I said gently. "Come on in." That was how it began, not with funding or awards, but with quiet courage walking through my door. Eleanor moved in like she'd always belonged there. She set up a corner desk, brought in diagrams, asked questions that made me think harder. We argued sometimes, respectfully, fiercely, about angles and forces and ethics. She taught me the language of the system I'd been skirting my whole life. I taught her how to listen to what a machine was telling you when it didn't want to cooperate. Simone came often, too. Sometimes she helped Aaron with his homework while I worked. Sometimes she just sat, observing. Her presence changed the room. People straightened when they saw her walk in, not because she was famous, but because she carried herself like someone who'd survived something and decided to stay soft anyway. Not everyone was happy. Stratham didn't stop pushing. They questioned every adjustment, every patient story. Anonymous complaints found their way to oversight boards. Inspectors showed up unannounced, measuring tape in hand, suspicion in their eyes. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling inspection, I slumped onto my stool, exhaustion pressing down on me like a physical thing. "I can't do this forever," I admitted to Eleanor. "They're waiting for me to slip." She leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "They're waiting for you to quit," she corrected. "Big difference." I laughed weakly. "You ever get tired of fighting, all the time?" she said. "That's how I know it matters." The first grant came 6 months later. Knee funding. Modest, provisional, but real. I stared at the email for a long time before it sank in. I printed it out and taped it next to the cardboard sign. Claudia came by that evening with a bottle of something expensive and a smile I hadn't seen before, lighter, freer. "This is just the beginning," she said. She was right. The lab grew. Slowly, carefully. We replaced the leaky roof, bought better equipment, took on apprentices, people who didn't fit neatly into traditional programs but had hands that listened and minds that questioned. The industry noticed. Some companies adapted. Others dug in their heels. Conferences invited me to speak, then rescinded the invitation when sponsors complained. I learned to live with the push and pull, the way progress always seems to anger those who profit from stillness. Through it all, Simone found her voice. She testified. She wrote. She spoke to rooms full of people who'd never considered what it cost to move through a world not built for you. She didn't speak in anger. She spoke in truth. "I don't want special treatment," she told one audience. "I want thoughtful treatment." People listened. One night, after everyone had gone home, I stayed late again. Old habits die hard. I stood in the center of the lab, no longer just a garage, and listened to the quiet. It was different now, fuller. Like the silence held stories instead of ghosts. I took Marcus's toolbox down from the shelf, opened it. Inside, beneath the wrenches and faded stickers, I found a folded piece of paper I'd forgotten about. A sketch, rough, uneven, a brace design that allowed for flexibility instead of force. He'd drawn it years ago. My throat tightened. I sat down and let the moment wash over. Me. Not grief exactly, but gratitude. He'd been with me all along, in the questions, in the refusal to accept good enough when people were hurting. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back where it belonged. The lawsuit threats eventually faded, not because Stratham admitted fault, but because the world had moved on without. Regulations shifted, language changed, patient. First stopped being a slogan and started being a standard. One afternoon, Aaron ran across the lab, laughing, his braces humming softly, perfectly. His mother cried without apology this time. I watched from the doorway, hands in my pockets, heart full and aching. This wasn't the life I'd planned. It was better, harder, truer. And it started with a broken car and a girl who refused to believe pain was the price of living. Success has a sound people don't talk about. It isn't applause or praise. It's the quiet knock on the door from someone who's afraid to hope again. That sound became familiar at Holt Adaptive Design Lab. People came carrying folders thick with reports. X-rays folded too many times. Letters that began with "We regret to inform you." They came with shoulders hunched, voices cautious, eyes trained to accept disappointment before it arrived. I learned to slow everything down. Tell me where it hurts, I'd say. Show me how you walk when no one's watching. What do you wish they had asked you? Those questions changed the room every time. Still, not everyone believed in what we were doing. The skepticism grew louder as the lab gained attention. I heard it at conferences, in interviews, even whispered by colleagues who smiled to my face. He's just a mechanic. This isn't scalable. Empathy doesn't replace credentials. One afternoon, after a long day, I found Simone sitting alone on the steps outside the lab. The sun was setting, painting the concrete gold. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, then shook her head. "They invited me to speak at a summit," she said, "but only if I don't mention you." I sat beside her. "What'd you tell them?" "I told them you're the reason I'm standing," she said. "So if they don't want to hear your name, they don't want to hear my story." Pride swelled in my chest, heavy and warm. "You didn't have to do that," she smiled softly. "I know. I wanted to." The pressure came to a head the following winter. An anonymous complaint triggered a full review. Every file, every adjustment, every decision scrutinized. Inspectors walked through the lab with clipboards and frowns, asking questions designed to trip me up. One of them, a man with silver hair and a tired expression, lingered after the others left. "My wife," he said quietly, "has braces like the ones you redesigned." I looked at him surprised. "She cries every night," he continued. "Says they hurt too much to sleep." He didn't ask for help. He didn't need to. The silence between us was enough. "Bring her by," I said. The review passed. Barely, with conditions, with warnings, but it passed, and the man brought his wife. Claudia's involvement evolved too. She stopped being just a benefactor and became something closer to family. She asked questions, not about returns, but about people. She listened more than she spoke. One evening, over takeout eaten off paper plates in the lab, she said, "You know, I spent years believing the best care was the most expensive care. I wiped my hands on a napkin. It's a common mistake." She nodded. I thought money could insulate Simone from suffering. Turns out it just bought better excuses. We sat with that truth for a while. The hardest moment came quietly. A young man named Louis arrived one morning, his sister pushing his wheelchair, advanced condition, multiple failed interventions. He smiled bravely, but his eyes told a different story, one of exhaustion. I examined his devices, my heart sinking. The damage wasn't just mechanical, it was systemic. "I can improve your comfort," I said carefully, "but I can't give you what was taken." Louis nodded. "I know," he said. "I just want it to hurt less." After they left, I locked myself in the office and sat alone, staring at Marcus's photo. The weight of limits pressed down on me. Mumbrases Andersid. For every victory, there were boundaries I couldn't cross. Eleanor found me there later. "You can't save everyone," she said gently. "I know," I replied, "but I wish I could." She rested a hand on my shoulder. "What you're doing matters because you know the difference. The industry shift didn't happen all at once." It never does. It happened in language first. User-centered, adaptive, collaborative. Words that once lived in footnotes moved into mission statements. Then it happened in training programs, in patient advisory boards, in engineers spending time listening instead of just measuring. I was invited, finally, to no edits. I stood on that stage in my work boots and told the room about Marcus, about Simone, about the boy who ran across my lab floor like he'd stolen something precious. "I'm not here to replace medicine," I said. "I'm here to remind it why it exists." The applause was polite at first. Then it grew. Late one night, after the lab was quiet again, I locked up and walked out into the cold air. The sky was clear, stars sharp and distant. I thought about the promise I'd made my brother, not with words, but with every choice since he died. I hadn't healed him. I hadn't fixed everything, but I'd listened. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. The thing about public change is that it always comes with private resistance. Just when it felt like the ground had steadied beneath us, Stratham made one last move. Not loud, not flashy, but sharp enough to draw blood if you weren't paying attention. They didn't come after me this time. They came after the people. Insurance partners quietly dropped coverage for modified devices. Hospitals issued internal memos discouraging referrals to non-traditional labs. Patients called in tears, confused, afraid they'd lose access to what finally helped them. It was clean, strategic, legal, and it made me angrier than any lawsuit ever could. Simone found me pacing the lab floor one morning, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles ached. "They're squeezing from the sides," she said, hoping we won't notice until it hurts too much to keep going. I stopped, looked at her. "They're betting on silence," she nodded. "Then we don't give it to them." The hearing was announced with less than a week's notice. A public policy review, insurance, regulatory alignment, patient safety. The kind of thing most people ignored until it affected them directly. This time people showed up. The room filled slowly. Wheelchairs, canes, braces of every kind, parents holding folders, veterans with stiff postures and sharper memories. I sat at the long table with Eleanor and Claudia, my hands folded, my heart steady in a way that surprised me. When my turn came, I didn't talk about innovation. I talked about listening. "I'm not here because I wanted to challenge an industry," I said. "I'm here because my brother trusted systems that didn't trust him back." There were murmurs, nods. Simona spoke next. She stood without assistance, walked to the microphone, and let the silence do some of the work. "For years," she said, "I was told pain meant progress, that if I complained, I was ungrateful." Her voice didn't shake. "I learned that pain is information, and when we ignore it, we fail people." A woman in the back wiped her eyes. Stratham's representative spoke after that, measured, careful, full of concern about standards and risks. He never once mentioned a patient by name. The contrast was unmistakable. The ruling didn't dismantle Stratham. That was never realistic. But it did something quieter and more powerful. Insurance pathways were revised. Pilot programs approved. Language inserted that required patient feedback as part of device evaluation. It wasn't a victory parade. It was a door cracked open, and people rushed through. The lab changed after that. More oversight, more paperwork, more responsibility, but also more reach. We built programs that taught engineers how to observe, not just calculate. Eleanor took on a formal role, her name finally attached to the work she'd always done. Watching her sign documents with steady hands felt like justice in slow motion. Simone started a foundation, not flashy, not loud, focused on advocacy and education. She visited schools, spoke to medical students, sat with families in waiting rooms because she remembered what that felt like. One afternoon, I watched her help a young girl stand, encouraging, patient. You don't have to be. You just have to be honest. The girl nodded, tears streaking her cheeks, and took a step. I got older. Not all at once, just enough to notice my hands stiffen in the mornings. Enough to understand that legacy isn't built in a single moment, but in consistency. One evening, as I locked up, I noticed someone had added to the wall above my tools. Marcus's sketch was framed now, mounted carefully. Beneath it, someone had written in neat letters, designed with empathy. I didn't ask who did it. I didn't need to. The calls still came. The knocks still sounded. Not every story ended well, but more of them ended better than before, and when I felt tired, when the weight of responsibility pressed too hard, I remembered that broken Rolls-Royce stalled in front of a rundown garage. I remembered a girl in pain and a mother out of options. I remembered the moment I chose to speak instead of stay quiet. One night, long after the lab lights were off, I sat alone with a cup of bad coffee and looked around the space that had grown from grief. I did what I could, I said aloud, not sure who I was talking to anymore. The silence felt kind. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in quietly, like dust after a long road, almost unnoticeable until one day you realize you're breathing easier. For me, healing looked like ordinary mornings, unlocking the lab door, the smell of clean metal instead of rust, the sound of voices, patients, engineers, students, blending into something that felt alive. I stopped talking to Marcus every day, not because I missed him less, but because I finally felt like I was carrying him forward instead of chasing him backward. One afternoon, years after Simona first walked across my garage floor, she brought me a framed photograph. It showed the lab on a busy day, people everywhere, motion captured mid-step. I thought you should have this, she said. I studied the image. In the corner, barely noticeable, was me, head bent, listening to someone explain where it hurt. I don't look very heroic, I said. She smiled. That's why it's perfect. Claudia changed too. Power softened when it no longer needed to defend itself. She started funding quietly, intentionally, backing programs that didn't carry her name but carried her values. One evening, as we sat together watching the lab empty out, she said, I used to think legacy was something you left behind. I waited. Now I think it's something you stand inside of, she finished. I nodded. And let others change. She glanced at Marcus's sketch on the wall. Your brother would be proud. I hope so, I said. And for the first time, I meant it without doubt. The industry kept moving. Slowly, imperfectly. There were setbacks, budget cuts, policy reversals that stung like old wounds reopening. But the foundation held. What surprised me most was how many engineers started showing up not to argue but to learn. They stood beside patients, watched them walk, asked questions without defensiveness. One young man stayed late one night. They never taught us this part, he said quietly. Which part? I asked. The listening. I handed him a wrench. You can't teach it in a lecture, I said, but you can practice. On the anniversary of Marcus's death, I closed the lab early. I drove out past the city, past the noise, until the road narrowed and the sky opened. I sat on the hood of my truck and let the wind do its work. I didn't fix you, I said softly, feeling foolish and honest all at once. But I didn't forget you either. The grief was still there. It always would be, but it no longer defined the shape of my days. The last patient of that year was a woman named Ruth, 72, sharp-tongued, tired of being treated like a problem to manage. When she stood after we finished adjusting her device, she didn't cry. She laughed. Well, she said, testing her weight. That's better, she paused, then looked at me seriously. Why did you do this? I thought about all the answers I could give. The press, friendly ones. The technical ones. I loved someone who hurt, I said. And I learned that pain ignored doesn't disappear. She nodded once. That'll do. On the final day of the year, Simone and I locked up together. The lab was quiet, lights low, shadows long. You know, she said, people still call what happened to me a miracle. I smiled. People like simple explanations. She looked at her legs, steady and strong. It wasn't a miracle. It was someone paying attention. She met my eye. I didn't answer right away. I promise, I said finally, to keep listening as long as I'm able. That seemed to satisfy her. That night, alone again, I stood beneath the framed sketch and the words beneath it, designed with empathy. I ran my fingers over the frame, feeling the grain of the wood, the weight of everything that had led here, the garage that wasn't a garage anymore, the brother who never stopped teaching me, the girl who refused to accept pain as her future. This wasn't redemption. It was responsibility, and it was enough. Sometimes life hands us broken things, a broken body, a broken promise, a broken system, and asks us what we'll do with the pieces. I never planned to become anything more than a mechanic in a forgotten corner of town, but when Simone walked into my garage, pain etched into every step. Something inside me. It was a reminder that healing isn't just about fixing parts. It's about listening, understanding, and having the courage to challenge what's good enough. My brother Marcus taught me that lesson in ways I didn't realize until years later, in his silent suffering, in his refusal to give up, and in the quiet hope that maybe someone would see him as more than a diagnosis. This story isn't about miracles. It's about humanity, about empathy, driving innovation, about the power we all have when we choose to pay attention to the people behind the problems. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever faced a moment when you could either stay silent or speak up for what felt right? What did you choose? How did it change you? If this story touched you, if it made you think about the power of listening and caring in a world that sometimes moves too fast, please share your thoughts. Tell me in the comments below. Your voice matters. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about real people, real struggles, and real hope, please subscribe and support the channel, because sometimes the smallest act of paying attention can change everything. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.